Moton Museum friends, it is an honor to join you today for this conversation with Lee Sentell. Lee serves as the director of Alabama Tourism Department, where he has overseen tourism growth in the state. He is in his fifth term within the Alabama governor's cabinet. For folks like myself who have the honor of being in the civil rights tourism space, Lee is highly regarded and well respected within our profession. And I wanted to have this conversation today because Lee and the work that he does helps to show us the importance of civil rights tourism, the importance of historic preservation, the importance of telling important stories that have helped to change the nation for the better. And so, Lee, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Congratulations on this anniversary.
Thank you very much. We are very excited each April to have the opportunity to commemorate the Moton Student Walkout, led by 16-year-old Barbara Johns and her classmates, along with Barbara Johns Day in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so for our conversation today, my goal is to focus first and foremost on the book that Lee has authored, the official United States Civil Rights Trail, What Happened Here Changed the World. If this is not a book that you have not yet had the opportunity to obtain, I would certainly encourage you to do that. A rich book of great historic information. And, for folks like myself looking to plan a trip to sites across the South, it is a great book to help curate some really powerful experiences. Additionally, we want to chat about efforts that Lee has led on behalf of the Alabama Tourism Corporation to work with the National Park Service to nominate a number of civil rights landmarks as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, an effort that has expanded to include a number of additional sites in a serial nomination effort, including the Robert Russell Moton Museum here in Farmville. And then finally, the thoughts that Lee has on the importance of civil rights tourism and what these sites represent to the world. And so what we know is that through this book, the U.S. Civil Rights Trail, it is a powerful collection of churches, courthouse, schools, museums, and other landmarks across the South, each that played a pivotal role in the civil rights movement. And so I want to take a few steps back, Lee, to just first and foremost ask, how did Alabama get into the civil rights tourism space? And how did you specifically get started in this important tourism work?
I think the start will surprise you.
Yeah.
In 1982, George Wallace was running for what would be his fourth term as governor. He was behind in the polls because people who are a lot older than you are, that's what it requires. Wallace had been governor for 3 terms, and he had run for president several times. And in 1982, he was behind in the runoff to pick the Democratic nominee. I'll set this up for people who don't know the proximity of what we call Martin Luther King's church, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. It literally is 1 block from the state capitol. So you can stand in front of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church and just turn slightly and look to your left, and you're looking straight into the Alabama State Capitol that was built in the 1850s. And it's where Jefferson Davis was sworn in as president of the Confederacy. And so that's the juxtaposition of what we're talking about. Well, Wallace was running behind. one Sunday morning before the runoff for the Democratic nomination. As most people know, he was a victim of an assassination attempt, which left him unable to walk. So one Sunday morning, just as church was starting, Governor Wallace shows up in front of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church with a state trooper who helped get his wheelchair out. And Governor Wallace showed up inside the church, wheeled himself down to the front of the congregation, unexpected, uninvited, unannounced. I mean, people were just shocked because Governor Wallace had never been to that church. The pastor handed him the microphone because it was obvious that he was there to speak. And Governor Wallace shocked everybody with what he said. He said, "I have not treated you and your families properly during my time in office, and I want to apologize. I want to ask for your forgiveness, and I want to ask for your vote." Well, there's one thing that I've learned in my 20 years in Montgomery. At least the African Americans in Montgomery are the most forgiving people. Now remember, this is the place where the civil rights movement literally started after Farmville's beginning as well. And African Americans voted for Governor Wallace and got him reelected. Well, the young man that he picked to be tourism director was not anybody Governor Wallace knew. This was a young man who he was the vice president of the Birmingham Convention and Visitors Bureau, and he wanted to be state tourism director. And so he had gone to see people in Birmingham who knew Governor Wallace well and told them that he wanted that job. Well, Governor Wallace hired him. He met him and hired him because they asked him to hire him. And it turns out that Ed Hall, had been a radio station announcer at age 17. One Sunday morning, he had his gear on, was getting ready to go to the radio station. And this was right before noon. And the station said, "Don't come to the station. Go to 16th Street Church. It's just been bombed." So Ed Hall lived only 5 minutes away from the church. And he was there in moments and saw those little girls' bodies brought out of the basement covered with sheets. And it had a profound impact on Ed. And after he had been Alabama's tourism director for about 6 months, he went to Governor Wallace and said, "Governor Wallace, you owe African Americans your reelection." And he said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Let's honor them by doing a booklet, a guide to civil rights side," or he didn't say civil rights, he said to Black heritage. And so they did a booklet, the Alabama Black Heritage Guide, which was the first one in the country that any state had done. And it was updated for 20 years. And so I've been in the industry a long time and I was familiar with it. So when Governor Bob Riley appointed me in 2003 to be state tourism director, I was familiar with the Black Heritage Guide. And I thought, this is Black heritage, but it's not so much tourism. And so I said, we're going to change this to make this the Alabama Civil Rights Trail. And so we plucked out things that the tourists could see, that they could visit. And so we built that and added other sites that were of interest to African Americans. And so it was about 2003 or 4, I guess, that we printed the first Alabama Civil Rights Trail brochure. And so we updated that every few years as new museums came on site. So that's really how one of your questions was, how did you get into this business? Well, that's how, because I thought this is an important piece. The Black Heritage Guide is an important piece, but it's more of interest to African American congregations than to general tourists. And so we created a brochure that had Alabama civil rights landmarks and told the history about Selma, Montgomery, and Birmingham, and other places dealing with African Americans. So that answers maybe one of your questions of how did this get started, and that's how we got started, because of George Wallace.
Thank you for sharing that, and what a powerful story that is, in the sense that Birmingham being the place where a lot of visually pivotal moments in the civil rights movement take place. I feel like a lot of the major moments that we've come to know about the movement, and for Alabama to be a state that embraces the importance of civil rights tourism, from your perspective, what has that meant to the state? Because I can imagine that when you go through these moments within the movement, there's a lot of healing that has to take place in communities all across the state. What has that been like for the state?
Well, maybe I should have said this at the very beginning. For those of you whose parents, particularly mothers, were school teachers, my mother was a history teacher. And that tells you more than you would want to know about me. But I had a twin sister, and we would sit down every night with our World Book Encyclopedia, and our mother would take us sort of through the classes. So after we got home from school, we had school again. So to me, history has just always seemed present and not at a distance. And so we first just had these brochures in our welcome centers, and it would sort of surprise people. I mean, we would hear comments from people saying, well, I didn't expect Alabama to be the state where we would see civil rights museums and churches and landmarks. But that was a comment that people, that our welcome center staff would hear from time to time. And we didn't put much money behind it. It was because I felt like, okay, this is something that people are interested in, and Alabama sort of needs to address our posture in this. And so we did. For the first few years, it didn't get much attention. And like I said, we didn't put advertising behind it initially. And but Alabama is a part of an organization called Travel South USA, which is an organization of the 13 state tourism directors in the South. And it's the oldest it's the oldest regional tourism organization in the country. It was started about 60 years ago by the Southern Governors Association. That organization just no longer exists, but Travel South USA, based in Atlanta with 12 states, is the oldest and best funded and strongest regional tourism organization in the country.
Thank you for that. As we talk more about the book, with the guide that transitioned to the Alabama Civil Rights Trail, it sounds like that was, a part of the foundation for you all as we began that movement towards the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. How did the U.S. Civil Rights Trail come to be? And were there other elements in addition to the Alabama Civil Rights Trail that helped to inspire that effort to come together?
I think because there is longevity among most of the Southern state tourism directors, I would say most people that are active now are maybe in their third term, transitioning through several governors. In some states, like North Carolina, it's a regional organization that is outside of state government. So people, other state tourism directors had noticed what Alabama was doing, and others were kind of interested in what the reaction to our civil rights brochure and trail had been. And I can't think that there was like any one particular thing or deadline that made us as an organization decide to create the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. You mentioned Georgia State University. We knew that the National Park Service was interested in having a development of the topic. There was an interest in UNESCO designations for architecture and a number of categories within the past 20 years. And so just out of curiosity, we invited colleges to submit proposals, and Georgia State University, which is based in downtown Atlanta, came up. They had the strongest interest, and so we asked them. Nobody had ever done an inventory of civil rights landmarks, and because there had never been sort of a structure large enough to express interest in that. And so we asked them to do research to find out how many sites or which sites would meet the minimum qualifications for UNESCO. And so they went away, and about a year later, they came back with a list of about 60 structures, some active, some no longer active. And so then we shared that list with our counterparts, with the other 11 state tourism directors in the South, and said, if we do a list of civil rights landmarks, what is missing in your state that is open to tourists now and that helps tell the story of civil rights in your state? And we came up with about another, I don't know, 40 more. And so with this, we had about 100 sites, and we used that to issue a list of about 100 sites on the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. So what started out to be one project really evolved into another one. And so we just, we started off with the Alabama Civil Rights Trail, and then Georgia, Mississippi, and Arkansas, and others did theirs. And so we said, okay, everybody's doing this. Let's bring it all together, because we are a regional tourism organization. And so that's how, and the phrase U.S. Civil Rights Trail just seemed to be a logical fit. And that was in 2018. And we had just about all the Southern governors on the first Sunday in January. It might have been the first Sunday in January, or it could have been Martin Luther King's birthday, I don't recall. That launched the U.S. Civil Rights Trail.
That is great to hear. I can imagine that as you pulled that list together, it was a list of 60 sites. As you have worked to bring together the trail, as you have worked within the World Heritage Initiative, I would imagine there's so many more sites that folks want to add. I know I get calls from different communities surrounding Farmville that see our involvement with the U.S. Civil Rights Trail and have a desire for themselves to be a part of that. How did you kind of set that criteria?
That's a great question. Our organization we're in the tourism business. We're not in the history business. So sort of my rule was, is this destination currently welcoming motor coach groups of tourists? To my thought, if your attraction is not big enough or well known enough to be welcoming large numbers of school groups or other motor coach groups, then I'm not sure that that community, that organization is ready to be on the Civil Rights Trail. Because every year, each Southern State Tourism Director has the opportunity to nominate one or more sites from their state. And we have, if you get a couple of no votes, then we sort of follow those. So again, it's not a list of sites where something happened or where Martin Luther King preached. Goodness knows Martin Luther King preached hundreds, if not thousands of times.
Yeah.
And so just because he preached someplace does not make it, to me, a tourism destination.
Yeah. I've heard you mention in previous talks that I've listened to that it's about experiences.
Yes.
That a site has the ability to create for visitors that visit.
Right. And the school in Topeka, Kansas, you and I met in Topeka, Kansas at what is now the school operated by the National Park Service. That place, just like your school, has a unique position in history. When I was working on the book several years ago, I was not familiar with Farmville, but the more I read about it, I mean, what caught me by surprise first was Barbara John's last name.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think a story that y'all have not told about Barbara Johns is that she had been urged by her uncle, Vernon Johns, to do something. I mean, he was pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, and he was from Virginia, but he was. It's hard to think about this now, but in the 50s, that when he was, I guess, late 40s and 50s, when Vernon Johns was at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, that was the church where the faculty of the Black College of Montgomery went to church. Yeah. That was considered the high church. And he was an interesting character. Vernon Johns was a rabble rouser.
Yeah.
He would say, okay, I know you people, all of you who work at Alabama State, you've got it made. You've got all the rights that you want. You're in great positions, but you need to be aware about your cousins on the other side of the tracks, because they don't have the opportunity that you have to have a good life, a nice house, a nice car, and to be well thought of in the community. He said, you need to be worried about other people. And so after a few years of that at Dexter Church, where the college people went to church, they kind of let him go.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that they ran Vernon Johns off. And a couple of years later, who did they get? They get Martin Luther King Jr. And, who was very well known. I mean, that's King, I think, was wrapping up his doctorate. He had all but dissertation done at the time. And so it was an interesting transition. But I think most people in Farmville don't know the connection between Barbara Johns and Barbara Johns' uncle, who was the forerunner of Martin Luther King. To me, it makes the Farmville story that much stronger because Dexter Church in Montgomery, which is where the civil rights movement started in addition to Farmville. So it made a great story and a great beginning.
Absolutely. And, I think, Vernon Johns was, a well-known individual within the Prince Edward community, along with his siblings, owned and operated a store in the Darlington Heights community. And, it makes me smile when I hear the story about, the church removing him as pastor, and then a short time later hiring Dr. King. And, Barbara, when I tell the story to museum visitors about the fact that Barbara goes to Montgomery shortly after the strike because of fears for her safety, folks are immediately taken back when I say Montgomery, because, they come to know of Montgomery for some of the pivotal moments within the movement. But I remind folks that, the student walkout was 4 years prior to Montgomery bus boycott. And so a lot of the moments that we would come to know had not yet happened. And so, it is a really neat connection to be able to make to visitors. And I think, as visitors come to learn about Vernon Johns, I mean, he was, he was one of the big theologians of his day, very well respected, very well, considered one of the top preachers nationwide.
Well, there's a funny thing to add to that. The people at Dexter, like I said, these were the wealthy African Americans, and they were kind of offended because Vernon Johns grew vegetables, and he would sell vegetables out in front of the church after the service was over, and that bothered them a little bit. But he said, there's great dignity in growing vegetables, and because it's a part of life. So he was an interesting person. The parsonage where Barbara Johns felt like she needed to get away from the school and that part of Virginia. Yes, she came to Montgomery, and I don't know the amount of time, but she lived at the parsonage that now we call the Martin Luther King parsonage. So I would need some people from Farmville to tell me what that range of dates was of when she came here.
Yeah. We're still, I think, one of the blessings with many of the sites that offer visitor experiences that are a part of the trail, we're very fortunate to still have individuals that live this history, who are able to walk beside us as storytellers of this experience. And so for us to be able to have Barbara John's siblings still active in the life of the museum as volunteers, as storytellers, as ambassadors to the story, is a really powerful thing. Unfortunately, following the student walkout, there was a fire that engulfed the Johns family home. And so a lot of the mementos that one would have as it relates to photographs and other items were destroyed as it relates to that. So what we don't have as it relates to some of the mementos, we're still fortunate to have the individuals who experienced it that are still with us that can, share those stories, confirm those range of dates, and other items. My next question for you, I love the subtitle that you offer for the book, What Happened Here Changed the World. What was it about this subtitle that inspired that for you as you were writing the book?
I stole that from Birmingham.
Okay.
If you look over my shoulder, this is an ad that was in Smithsonian Magazine a couple of months ago. But Birmingham, this is an ad that we did for Birmingham. This is the 60th anniversary of the Birmingham movement, and on their 50th anniversary of the movement, that's where Dilsey Hilly, who was vice president for marketing at the Birmingham Convention and Visitors Bureau, that was the line that she came up with. And so I forgot that I had already heard that line, and I thought I had created that. No, I didn't. I had borrowed it and just not attributed it to Dilsey Hilly. But Dilsey, who had been with the Birmingham tourism people for, gosh, decades. I mean, she retired at the first of the year. But yeah, she was a great storyteller about what happened in Birmingham.
One of the things, that we have been very fortunate to be able to be a part of is the World Heritage Initiative led by Dr. Eskew and his team from Georgia State. It was your work with the Alabama Tourism Corporation that has helped to get that initiative off the ground and continue to support that initiative. I know it started for you all with a handful of sites that you had worked to nominate to the tentative list. What was that process like, and what was it about those initial sites that you put forth? What was it about the importance of those sites?
I can't claim any credit for that. That was an initiative of the Alabama Historical Commission.
Okay.
That's who had heard about this from the National Park Service, and I serve on that in the ex officio position, which means I don't go very often. But it's just because one of the things with my position, you're ex officio according to state limits. That my position is ex officio on that board. I can't vote, but we certainly support a lot of the things that the Historical Commission does. And but that's really been Georgia State's project. A number of the southern states are involved in that. I mean, just about some of the states that are in the northern part of our region are not as actively involved, but more the deep south states are.
Yeah, that it's been a fantastic initiative to be a part of, and I know I've heard you mention before that that effort really came about also because of some the desire of the Obama administration to add more to kind of adjust the criteria a bit for the U.S. tentative list.
Well, and he talked about having more diversity in terms of national parks as well as World Heritage sites, and now Highway 80, which is the Selma to Montgomery region. There are now 3 National Park Service units: Selma, Montgomery, and Lowndes County. In that 54-mile stretch, there are 3 National Park Services locations that have now opened. And in Birmingham, the motel where Dr. King stayed a lot has been restored at the Gaston Motel, and that was Martin Luther King's headquarters, Suite 30, when the Birmingham movement was taking place. And like I said, we're in the middle now of the 60th anniversary of the period when the the law enforcement for Birmingham turned fire hoses and dogs on kids who were demonstrating. So that's, and that backfired on law enforcement in Birmingham. I mean, it horrified the world. It was not Martin Luther King did not like the idea of the children being marching, but the Birmingham movement had sort of run out of steam. The media had sort of left because, well, there's nothing left to cover. And but one of King's assistants came up with this idea, and yes, and it generated images that the world has never forgotten.
Definitely. I know you mentioned Loudoun County, and I know we've in the news been able to see the Emmett Till story being elevated in conversation based on movies, television shows, the Loudoun County documentary from Dr. Hassan Jeffries. What has it been about the U.S. Civil Rights Trail that has helped to put some of these stories more on the minds of individuals who are engaging with this history?
Well, the reality is the Civil Rights Trail has not created a single structure or a single landmark. But what it has done is to provide sort of a basket, for lack of a better term, of these landmarks where important stuff happened, and that these are open for the public to visit. And so I think that's been the key thing, is so because most of these, most of the sites are locally financed. They don't have big corporate support from somebody out of state, but it's made sites feel like we're not alone, because we are part of something larger. And the Civil Rights Trail, to be honest, we never had a vision of like, okay, gosh, in 7 years we hope that this is going to happen. I mean, we just sort of made it up as it went along. But it was Glenn Eskew's initial interest in helping work on a project for UNESCO that really started the whole thing. So a number of organizations have provided funds toward Georgia State, and but from the beginning I said, we're not going to put our thumbs on the scale and say, okay, we got to have X number of sites from Alabama. I mean, I said, we're not going to get into the selection business. That's for the experts to do. But we're not going to try to say, oh, although I am a big fan of the bridge, and you can say I showed that I put the bridge on the front of the book because when national handbooks on tourism list the Edmund Pettus Bridge as one of the 10 most important sites in America, it's like, okay, well, that's a pretty impressive designation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are, it's one of those sites where, I feel like, even if you don't know all there is to know about the movement in full, that bridge, I mean, it's just, a site that is etched into the minds of many individuals across the country.
Yeah. But John Lewis had a lot to do with in recent years, because in the last 20-something years, he brought a delegation from Congress every year on the anniversary, and that still continues. Last month, I think there were 25 Congress people, along with other people from Washington, that came and participated, and I was happy to be involved with that group again.
Definitely. My next question for you. So, you've had the opportunity to work with sites in Alabama, now sites outside of the state of Alabama. What are some of the most compelling sites for you personally? And, you know, as you've been engaged in this work?
Well, I'll tell you a site that I want to visit, and that's Farmville.
Yeah.
I was not familiar with the story until because I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what was coming from Virginia, but I learned really two important stories in my research on the book for Virginia, and that was the Freedom Rides came as a result of an action by a guy from Selma whose mother was actively involved in the campaign. I had never heard of Bruce Boynton until I was doing a lot of Googling in Virginia, and found out that, oh my gosh, a guy from whose mother was from Selma was the impetus for the Freedom Rides. And so I was Googling Bruce Boynton, and up popped an article in the Selma newspaper. And Al Ben, who wrote the story, used to be my boss in my first job as a reporter in Decatur, Alabama. And I said, wow, Al, I see where you got an interview with Bruce Boynton. How did you get him? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'm sure he doesn't visit there very often. He said, well, Lee, he's lived here for the last 60 years. And I said, oh gosh, we want to interview him for our website. And he said, well, he goes to dialysis 3 times a week, so you might want to move quickly. And I'm glad that we did. His wife brought him, and through the interview with her, we found out that she was 6 years old on the Selma Bridge on Bloody Sunday. And so if you'll go to civilrightstrail.com, we have some great interviews with both of those. And by the way, the website is brand new as of this month.
Excellent. Excellent. The, so many, this book, has helped me to kind of map out visits that me and my team want to make. And so, it's definitely something to look forward to. One of the things that I think has been really neat is just the attention that the book and the trail have received. I mean, that, publications all across the world that have highlighted the work of the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. What has that been like? And was that something that exceeded expectations as you first started out with this effort?
To be honest, I had no expectations. I was not intending to write a book. I thought we had some great photography, and it was Bernice King, who I've worked with several times. She said, you have a very nice website, but that requires people to work, to go to these different sites. She said, what you need is a book. And so I had the ad agency sort of turn all the photography into a layout. And then I realized we really didn't have a whole lot of content. And I thought, this is a picture book primarily.
Yeah.
But I thought, I want to tell the story of each community, because each one is different. I think the main thing I've learned in studying civil rights sites over the last 10 or so years is that everything that was generated locally was because of a local personal need. And because I'm old enough to remember when a lot of these things took place in the 60s. And I remember the Freedom Rides bus was burned, and that was about 40 miles from where I lived. And so I was very aware of the burning of that. So several years later, when the March to Selma's took place, I thought, well, I thought they settled all this. But what I had not been thinking, because I was a lot younger then, but everything that happened in every location was for a specific need. It's not like Martin Luther King said, okay, this will work in this town, and so I'm going to go to this town and make it work. Everything was a need generated by the local people because of specific individual shortcomings to their lives.
Excellent. And so my final question as we end our conversation today, what would you say to individuals why would you, if individuals were to ask, why is it important to understand the significance of the sites and visit the sites that make up this trail, what would be your answer to that question?
I think that's a good question, because a lot has happened in the last 60 years, so that the lives of African Americans are markedly better than during the Jim Crow days. And I think it's important for people to be aware of the differences and what local people went through to make their lives better, because they were not getting a lot of help from the federal government and from Congress, not getting a lot of help at all. But I think it's fascinating how the local people responded to their needs. And of course, everybody wanted Martin Luther King to come to their town. But when you look at the real story, it was the local people, not a big preacher coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to stay here for 3 days and your life's going to change. But the local people generated their own energy and media coverage, which brought the attention of their particular problems to the outside world. And people have not gotten enough credit or honor for what the local people did.
Excellent. Well, I think that is a great way to end. Folks, it's been an honor to spend some time talking with Lee Sentell, Director of the Alabama Tourism Department, author of the official United States Civil Rights Trail, What Happened Here Changed the World. Thank you.
What happened in Farmville started the change.
Thank you. Thank you. We oftentimes like to say we are the birthplace of the student-led civil rights revolution. So
keep saying that.
Thank you. Thank you. So I gotta get like you and kind of get good at marketing that statement. But thank you, Lee. We very much appreciate it.
Great being with you. Thanks.